Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our May Fields of Knowledge session, where we have three panelists joining us to discuss the topic of women in agriculture, the stressors they encounter daily, and how these pressures affect their health and wellness. With 2026 being declared as the International Year of the Woman Farmer, we wanted to highlight the roles women play in agriculture and the oftentimes unrecognized efforts they put forward to ensure the success of farming operations and agri-food systems in general. Before we get into the topic, I would like to remind you all of what Fields of Knowledge is all about. As part of our research and outreach efforts, we hope to create conversations about pertinent topics for rural communities in relation to health and well-being, hosting guests from service provision, research, as well as community members in order to create an open dialogue session where attendees can share their thoughts and comments as the session gets underway. I encourage anyone on the call today to use the chat function to share any thoughts, questions, or reflections you might have throughout the session. Additionally, please be mindful that we will be covering topics today that may be sensitive to some, so please be respectful in your thoughts and reflections and responses. Without further delay, I will now introduce our wonderful panelists for today's session. Dr. Florence Becot is a rural sociologist and the nationwide insurance early career professor at the Pennsylvania State University. She also leads the Penn State Agricultural Safety and Health Program, focusing on understanding and supporting agricultural communities' ability to meet their needs with an emphasis on health, safety, well-being, and economic viability. Becot received her bachelor's from the University of Rennes, France, her master's from the University of Vermont, and her PhD from the Ohio State University. Next, we have Christina Day. Christina Day is the Farm Services Navigator at NYCAMH. She helps farmers find the right resources, think through their safety plans, and make sure their voices are heard by bringing their biggest concerns back to NYCAMH so we can work on relevant solutions. She grew up on a small dairy and hay farm in central New York and has a bachelor's degree in agricultural science from Cornell University. She is an alumni of Class 18 of Lead New York, an intensive leadership program focused on food systems, agriculture, and natural resources. Christina and her husband have 3 young children. Last but certainly not least, Marylynn Mattison-Collins has served as the dairy and livestock educator for Oneida County Cooperative Extension for nearly 16 years. In addition to providing educational programs for ag producers and consumers alike, Marylynn has had the good fortune to facilitate a variety of discussion groups for area producers. Most recently established in early 2026 is the Women in Ag group that continues to gain momentum. Her spouse, Alan, is a dairy farmer who, in partnership with his family, operates Collins Knoll Farm in Chadwicks and Waterville, New York. For over 20 years, Marylynn has enjoyed raising beef on her and Alan's 90-acre cow-calf operation in Secaucus, where she is responsible for the daily feeding, management, and marketing tasks for their freezer beef business. Welcome, everybody. Excited for this session to get started. So this session is on women in agriculture and the burdens that they face, and there has been this term that is coined the triple burden faced by women in agriculture. And I think I would like to start with Florence on the research that you have done in identifying the different burdens that farm women experience and how they move forward and navigate those struggles and how, just framing the problem.
Yeah, thanks, Destiny, and thanks so much for having me. So this comes from research that we've been doing with colleagues at The Ohio State University around childcare and how it intersects with farm safety, the safety of children, as well as farm business viability. And as part of that research, we talked with a number of farm women over 60, 68 about what it's like for them to raise their children on the day-to-day and what's their lived reality of being a woman and raising children. The reason why we specifically wanted to talk to women as part of this study, and later we talked to anyone through a survey, is that we know that women continue to do the bulk share of childcare. And so as we were having these discussions, we had over 11 different focus groups, and we also did photo voice activity, which I'm happy to talk on later. What came up again and again as they were talking about how they navigate the children in the day was all of the different tasks that they have to juggle. Their work on the farm, their work of the farm, the work of caring for the children, sometimes the work of caring for elder parents, the work of keeping the house clean. And so really what it got us, to really see was that triple burden, which we're not the first one to have discussed. This has been discussed in research on women in agriculture since at least the 1980s, where there has been that discussion of women are expected on farms to do all these things. Sometimes they have great support from partners and family members, and sometimes not so much.
It's very interesting work. Marylynn, I would like to come to you and ask you, you work with livestock and dairy producers daily, and you have started the Women in Ag focus group in 2026. And I just wanted to get, your personal experience with farmers and producers in the area and what you have seen out there.
Certainly. Thank you for this opportunity this afternoon. So in my role with Extension, working with local producers, still to this day, I'd say the majority are still the male figure that I'm working with on farms, though I am seeing a bit of a shift in that proportion. Specifically with beef production, I interact more with women farmers on the daily. What I'm recognizing with both beef and dairy farm owners is the increasing role that women will have on their farming operations. In addition to, many of them are young mothers with families. And so more and more, specifically in this Women in Ag group, I'm finding that women have a strong desire to sit and talk and share those concerns, and that is empowering. I think it's needed.
Yeah.
It's encouraging, and I think it is a huge outlet for a number of women. And I'm happy to be a part in that and coordinate that for my local producers. And also on a personal note, to be able to find a group that you can express concerns with openly and without judgment, really beneficial to working through challenges, farm and non-farm related. So
Yeah, that's
yeah.
so great. The Women in Ag group that you have built seems to be something, like you said, very empowering of giving these women a voice, and that's something that's very important. Yeah.
It is, and it speaks to, and a reminder to me that there is that need out there that we can help facilitate, right? And extension services aside, to be able to approach these topics as a woman in farming, I think helps ease that uncomfortableness and certainly helps in relating, right? Because I live those struggles at times, or I can learn from that and pass on what I've learned, and I can get different perspectives from others living similar lifestyles. So it's a win-win.
Absolutely. Yeah. The rural access to healthcare, or to childcare, sorry, not healthcare, rural access to childcare in general, and access to childcare for everybody is quite an interesting topic. Christina, I know you have 3 young children, and your husband has a job at home, and I know that you guys you juggle your kids around a lot, and I mean, I feel like for some people who don't have children or have children that are grown, it can be easy to say, well, why not just, put your children in childcare, or hire a babysitter. But there are barriers to that, and I know, as our farm services navigator, you have a lot of interaction with farmers in our area. And I was wondering if you have any either personal experience with childcare or Navigator experience with the producers that you talk to based on childcare and the struggles that these women farmers or male farmers see on a day-to-day basis pertaining to their children.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on childcare, but I think the thing that comes to mind kind of at the forefront is the flexibility needed in agriculture for childcare is it just doesn't match very well with you know, typical childcare hours. I know personally that you know, my hours for work and then my husband's hours that he works and the way that our schedules are very it can be challenging to know, okay, I'm going to be home at 5 every single day. Like, there's a lot of variability. And so that makes us having children in childcare really challenging. It doesn't fit that mold. And it's the same, you know, in agriculture a lot of times. And I remember I was at a farm with a woman who had 3 really young kids, and she was full-time at the farm, working on the farm. And they have their kids in childcare, but, you know, still after those hours, she was left having her kids on the farm with her, but still doing farm work. And so, you know, she would strap her youngest child's car seat into the instructor seat in the tractor, the extra seat in the tractor. And that's not something that like we as NYCAMH recommend, but like, she's like, what else am I going to do? Like I have to keep them safe somewhere and I have to have my eyes on them. And this seems, we're in a cab. This seems like the safe spot for them to be. And so I think there's, you know, that kind of inflexibility that like is the typical system. And then the way that agriculture works, it, those don't align. I guess. And it leaves you to make tough decisions about like your kids and safety and things like that.
Yeah, kind of that touches back on Florence's work on the paper, the biggest stress, but the biggest joy, the greatest stress, but the greatest joy, on the whole triple burden in general, but specifically to the fact that a lot of times you cannot find flexible childcare. So it leads to the parents having to have the children at the operation. And then there's the whole safety of being around heavy machinery, being around livestock, being around all the dangers that you find every day on a farm. And you found that, I think quite obviously, that also ups stress and, you know, levels of worry. So did you want to talk on those findings a little bit?
Yeah, happy to, Destiny. I think what was interesting or that came up again and again. So that study that you're referring to, Destiny, is a study where we ended up looking at the level of stressors around women and in particular gendered stressors. So there's been an increased awareness around mental health challenges in agriculture, but oftentimes those don't look at the gender nature of different people's roles and responsibilities. And a lot of that research has been more about men. And here we wanted to understand, well, what does it look like for women where you are juggling the children, you're juggling the off-farm work so that you can get the health insurance for the family, you're juggling the work on the farm. And really what was telling as we were doing those focus groups, which were about an hour. In the beginning, it was, you know, people will kind of talk about, we were asking very simple questions about from the moment that the children wake up to the moment that they go to bed, where are they at, who are they with, what are they doing? And Christina, what you shared was very similar to what we heard, where people are putting together this very complex childcare arrangements. It's kind of a jigsaw puzzle where there might be different between that hour and that hour they're with dad, and that hour and that hour they're with grandma, and it also varies a lot based on the ages. But one thing that kept coming up again and again, and that we were not asking specifically, was the mental health piece and the levels of stress that people shared about. In the focus groups, when we went back to look at what people talked about in every single focus group, without us mentioning stress had been brought up. Multiple women talked about depression, including related to pre or postpartum depression. And another thing too that people talked about was, and I think Marylynn, that connects to the work that you do and why it's so important, women have felt unseen and felt like I can't talk about it to others. I can't, or almost in some instances was like, I hadn't realized that I wasn't the only one. And what was interesting too with our focus groups for various reasons, we had people from different states, different commodities. So we had people from Vermont, maybe on a third of an acre doing specialty crop, to people from Wisconsin that might have had a 2,000 herd dairy farm, to people in Ohio, very large. And what people were all talking about is, man, we often talk about how different we are, but in reality, there are so many things that are similar. And the thing too that we saw in those focus groups is that desire to have those conversations. And Marylynn, that's why the work that you are doing and bringing people together, creating a space where people can have those conversations, it's so important. And that's actually the reason why we decided to do focus group. In the beginning of the study, where we're going to do one-on-one interviews, we were going to travel, and then COVID happened. So that threw a curveball. But also years prior, and that was before my time at Penn State, years prior, colleagues at Penn State had done really important research around how does extension serves the needs of women or does not serve the need of women. And one of the things that they had noticed was women's desire, as part of their research, women's desire to have those conversations. And once the focus groups, their research was over, they decided to continue having those conversations and bring women together. And so that was a reason too why we chose for them to have a space. And I would tell you, I've never had a research project where after the fact people emailed us and shared about how important that research was for them. About a year later, a woman shared that after the focus group, she had gone to her healthcare provider looking for help because she hadn't realized how much she was struggling. So and it's that interesting tension that we found too, that people love the farm, many, right? They wouldn't want a different lives, but at the same time, it's so hard, in particular when you don't have enough resources to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Being a fellow qualitative researcher, it's really interesting once you get these participants and you sit them down and you start to talk. It's at the beginning, it's kind of like, oh, nobody really wants to share, but once they start talking, they don't really stop. And I think that's great. Creating that space is wonderful. Did Marylynn, I didn't know if you had something to say. I was going to come to you next anyway. I think we have a really interesting dynamic. Christina has very young children. Marylynn has adult children. And I know, Marylynn, you were, working on your husband's family's dairy farm at the time. And also you started with CCE at Oneida County, and you also are doing the beef operation that you and your husband have. So would you like to talk on your experience of juggling all of those things at once and how you did it, you Wonder Woman?
No, not at all. It's funny, in preparation for today's panel, I was kind of finding myself reflecting a lot over the recent hour or overnight, in preparation for today. And so I was, a little backstory briefly, I had the good fortune to stay home with my kids when they were infants until they reached school age. So I came into the workforce much later than many. And reflecting back now, a couple things to touch upon as far as, so childcare wasn't an issue for me, but a challenge that I had to work through as I got into working part-time off farm and still navigating farm obligations was this pressure to hurry up and get done on the farm so I can get back into the house to monitor behavior or meal prep or run kids to practice. So there's these segments of time, pre-driving, after school activities that as a mom, you're torn in multiple directions, and time budgeting, first to admit, I'm terrible at it. So that in itself was a challenge. What could I realistically get done on the farm and still meet my obligations in the home timely so that kids weren't late to practice? And
Right.
that, now being older, I can reflect back and say, oh yeah, I should have done X, Y, and Z. Or I think, I guess I'm speaking personally, but I'm thinking this applies to other farm moms as well. Stubborn in that I don't like to ask for help, but learning now that maybe I should have spoke up sooner and asked for help, or ask spouse for what is a reasonable expectation, on certain areas, who's going to balance this farm work, who's going to balance running of the kids. So communication could have been better. So the other thing too, being mom of adult kids now and navigating life as families grow, and at many times being the only parent in the home and on the farm, is how we navigate and handle those different stressors in the family lifestyle. And boy, that was, life throws some curveballs, right? If we're being realistic, and learning how to walk through those challenges as a family and coming out solid and mentally well is a learning process. And I think, in our nation, we do have a mental health crisis, whether people want to accept it or not. I'll be perfectly honest, we've experienced that in our family, and it's a learning moment. And I talk about it now because it needs to be talked about more. And that's something that has helped me navigate that in my family. So I think there's another area to explore in agriculture, is the mental health piece. So, I can't, again, really speak to the need for childcare with younger kids, but I certainly have seen and walked through challenges with school age kids and now adult kids. And one last point to share is, this is what I was trying to get to. Early on in my farming career, it was a challenge to know when I should encourage my kids to come out and join me with farming activities while keeping them safe and out of harm's way. With myself, particularly when it came to equipment, not being completely confident at that time running equipment, I did not want my children in the near vicinity.
Absolutely.
Having, we can't go back in time, but if I were to do it differently, I would have allowed more time to have them out with me and allow time for some instruction and guidance with them, bringing them along with me with chores. And that's not to say that they didn't help. They would often come out and hold a gate open for me, because I would explain to them that you can either spend 5 minutes holding a gate, or we could spend 50 minutes rounding up the herd again when they get out. So that was usually enough of a convincer to elicit their help. So
Right.
I'll stop rambling for now.
Oh, no, you were totally fine. You brought up a lot of wonderful points. To begin with, I wanted to touch on the communication point, the thought that you felt like you couldn't communicate, or you didn't know how to communicate the struggles that you were facing. And I think, a lot of people in general face that with stigma in mental health, but also there are gendered roles on the farm. And as Florence brought up before, women juggle a lot. They often have off-farm jobs to supply health insurance to the family, because as you may or may not know, with being self-employed, it's very hard to find affordable health insurance, healthcare access in general being a rule. and, you know, having an off-the-farm job, managing a lot of things on the farm, taking care of children, having their extracurricular activities, which you had mentioned as well, because you want to foster, you know, you want them to be able to do what they would like to do and be engaged. It just all adds so many different complexities that are very often overlooked. As far as the guidance with children, I think that's where our on-farm safety navigators or the farm services navigators, such as Christina, or the agricultural safety and health program, like what Florence heads at Penn State University. I think as much education as we can get out to the farm families pertaining to safety and health around the heavy machinery and livestock for the children, so you can have the children out, but know which situations they should be in and which situations they shouldn't be in, is very integral to the safety and health and stress reduction of everybody on the farm. I also
Can I add just
of course.
Oh, Destiny was just gonna say, can I add what's really interesting is when I talk with many farm parents, right, in my day-to-day interactions, is folks are very aware that it's dangerous, right? And we've actually asked the question, like, are you worried that the children could get hurt on the farm? And you know, most of them said, yes, I'm very worried, or worried at some point. And what's interesting too is that in our research, we've looked specifically at how is farm safety, or how are the safety guidance given to farm parents? And oftentimes when you look at the framing, it's from the perspective of convincing folks. And even around childcare. And the reason why we look at childcare, right, we know from research that the children who get hurt the most are the youngest one. They're young, non-working by extending children. They're your 3-4-year-old who are running around that are too young to follow. You know, you can repeat all you want. You know, they're very young, right, from a development perspective. And so childcare or supervision of the farm worksite, and childcare can be done by anyone. It can be grandma, it can be grandpa, it can be an older sibling away from the farm worksite. But what we've seen too sometimes is that tension of like, people know that it's dangerous, but they feel stuck. And I think, Christina, you made that point, and we heard it over and over again, where it feels safer as a parent to have their child in a car seat, in the tractor cab that is closed, than them being around. But the only thing too that I would say, sometimes the tension that we've heard within families, right? Depending on, is there a spouse that marries into agriculture? And that has a totally different perspective on what levels of dangers are. And I've talked to there's been mothers who've come to me during our farm safety days, and they're like, I married into farming and I'm really scared about what I see my in-laws doing, but how do I tell them? And so sometimes even you have pressure within the family, tensions where maybe the older generation is like, that's fine, that's how we've always done it. And younger generations are like, I'm not comfortable with this, but how do you tell grandma when grandma is your source of childcare? Or even what do you do when grandma or grandpa, their health is going down and they can't see very well? So there is like all these tensions too that are really hard to navigate on a personal level, even with communication.
Yeah, and that actually brings. Oh,
sorry,
go
Destiny.
ahead.
I would add to that, I kind of had jotted down something similar, that I think like this lifestyle is really important and valuable to the people that are in it, to farmers, that they want their children to have grow up on the farm. They think that it's a valuable, you know, they build valuable life skills on the farm and things like that. So I think oftentimes they're looking at it through that lens, where we're kind of like, well, here's this data, like there's, you know, kids are getting hurt all the time, but at the same time, it's like you know, you don't want to let go of this dream of like having your child be raised with similar memories that you had, or there's a nostalgia to it, I think, and that you want them to have similar experiences and build these certain life skills that are, you know, you can build on the farm. And so I think that's a challenging thing to kind of, you know, safety is a piece of this, but I think that's where, like Florence was saying, that people know it's dangerous, but they're still they still pursue it for that being one reason.
Yeah, but I think too from the perspective of even how we work with parents, right? And it's something that we try to do with our program. And I know that's something you do in New York State too, is focus on the practical solutions. Like, don't convince parents to change their ways, because they have their reasons, right? But like, what are the practical solutions that could help people having that safe play area on the farm? Or in the survey that we did too, as part of the childcare study, we asked what type of solutions will make it easier for you to juggle, all your personal and professional responsibilities. And that survey was both men and women. And we had a list of 18 different options. Some were about related to livelihood, the livelihood piece of it, and some were related directly to safety. And we had questions around would financial support to help with buying safety items help? And overwhelmingly people said, or PPE kits or something like that, that practical aspect of how do you help people be safer? Because when we do look at the research too around why are people not adopting safety practices, there always be the folks who will never change their way, but it doesn't matter, like any sliver of society, there are the people who never change their ways. No matter what it is, smoking, not eating vegetables, driving too fast, right? And then there are folks that are like, yeah, we would do it if money and time wasn't an issue. So money and time for us are always the biggest concern.
Yeah, with farmers especially, that is something that we hear over and over and over again. So I wanted to touch on the family tension piece that we talked about briefly with, in-laws and not really knowing how, Florence, you touched on, a farm wife who's nervous about how her in-laws are handling safety on the farm, and also just segueing into the fact that, these farm jobs, you're working with your family, there's a lot of work-family balance there, that the intersection there, which is really interesting, and I know that you talked about in your photo voice project as well, and just how to navigate the intersection of family and work and the stress that comes along with disagreements and things that may arise, and how to, like I just said, navigate that. Did you find anything from the women that they said that helped them navigate that type of relationship, or was helpful for them to move forward with that?
Yeah, that's not one that we specifically asked about directly. How do you handle your family?
Yep.
But it did come up a lot because, as you say, right, home and work overlap. You are working with your spouse, you're working with your parents, for some of them. And we heard a variety of things. Some people have the most delightful relationships with their family members, and it's wonderful. Some people have very strained relationships and they walk away. And some people talked about not being engaged with their family at all. And some people are kind of in the middle, where you suffer in silence, or once in a while you say something, but I think, like, oftentimes you keep peace, right? But I do think there's also, if you're someone who don't get along with your family, because we often think about family farms and getting along and everyone helping each other. And we often think too about that, when it comes to rural areas or that from the outside, right? And for some folks, when those relationships are not going well, it's a real struggle too, because there's a stigma, and people don't necessarily want to talk about it because they don't want to be judged by others. And so that adds different layers. But yeah, that family dimension things. And I think too is, what do couples often fight about? It's the money piece. And when you have thin profit margins on the farm, when you have a lot of uncertainty about what that income is going to look like, when you have the tension between, are we buying a new piece of equipment or are we buying something for the household? Because that's often part of the discussions, right? That's where you get those tensions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to come to Marylynn next, but I wanted to remind any viewers, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat. We'd love to interact with you. Marylynn, I wanted to come to you on, kind of, you've been in agriculture for a while, and you are a woman in agriculture, and how far do you think we have come? What are the differences you've seen over your career? And I know we are not anywhere near a happy place right now. I feel like we're on the up, but what are the changes that you've seen over the years for a woman in agriculture?
Wow, that's a pretty loaded question. So I'll do my best to address it. I think from a personal standpoint, a biggest change that we see or I've seen is the ability to make decisions either for the family or for the farm, and make them perhaps solely based on my thought processes, without consultation of spouse or others involved. In some circumstances, not all circumstances, of course, but building confidence to make those decisions. And sometimes they have to be timely decisions, right? Whether it's related to an animal health situation or a marketing situation, sometimes a decision has to be made and move on. And in addition to making the decision, becoming comfortable with the result of that decision. It may be wrong, it may be right, but accepting that and moving forward regardless and learning from it. That's something I see changing. I think the other big factor that I'm witnessing too is the ability to find our voice. Not only find it, but implement it. And I'd say still a work in progress for myself in finding that voice, but I think it's a critical skill to continue to have and work on and improve. Again, not only for spousal relations, but for farm business means too. To speak up and share ideas, to share viewpoints, to share concerns. I don't think that women in ag will continue to make progress if we're always going to sit in that people pleaser seat, if you will. We have to continue to look out for what it is we want out of a situation and to voice that and to share what our expectations are.
Absolutely.
If that
Yeah,
helps.
those are great points. Christina or Florence, do you have anything to add? I just want to make sure if you have anything that you can. Nope.
Well, I was gonna say I've done a lot of talking already, so I was waiting for Christina to see what she had to say.
Yeah, I think I guess it's less like how far have we come, but like where I'm hoping we can go is like I don't want us to like diminish our roles in agriculture. I think that we can minimize what we do. For instance, I had reached out to Marylynn about being a part of this panel, and I'd reached out to one other person, and it was funny because that other person did kind of minimize her role. She works on an off-farm job, but also does a lot of paperwork, HR type stuff as part of the farm, after her regular full-time job, and then they have young kids, and I, that input is really valuable, I think. And I think what she does is valuable. And I think she didn't see it that way. I don't think, but she certainly agreed, like, this topic resonated with her a lot, but she didn't think that, like, I don't know if I have, a perspective that matters on that. And I think she does. And that was, too bad that she felt that way. But I also think about, even we have, some funding opportunities here at NYCAMH. And for one of them, I feel like I don't know the stats on this, but we get a lot of the applications that we get are written by women, but it has the, you know, their partner is the person who's listed as the applicant, and or, you know, they signed the paper at the bottom, and but the woman has potentially done like most of the work to put the application together. And I think you know, I don't want to minimize that effort. Like there's this behind the scenes that may be happening in a lot of partnerships that's like I want to like value that work that's being done there. So yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, Chris, it's such an important point, Christina, right? Because there's been conversations about, oh, there's an increase in the number of women in agriculture, and there are more women in agriculture, right? Really, what we need to be careful about is how have women been counted or now counted historically, and the extent to which now they are counted more based on how the USDA is doing it, but that's also in other countries. But in reality, as you say, Christina, women have been in the background doing all this work that's been underappreciated, undervalued, where doing the paperwork is seen as not important, or running to town to get a part is seen as not as important as doing other aspects on the farm. But if that work is not done, the farm is not running as well. And so I think too, it's that aspect of like, let's not forget that women have always been around and have played such a crucial role. And so I get impatient when I see like, oh, like there are more women in agriculture, and maybe they are, but are there really? Or is their role finally being recognized?
Yeah, it's a great point, Florence.
Yeah, and I resonate with that too. I mean, there are people who refer to the farmer and the farmer's wife. The farmer's wife is also a farmer. There's no need to differentiate between the farmer and the farmer's wife. So that's a really great point. As you guys can see, we're getting close on time here, so we're gonna wrap up. Katrina has put in the chat a survey. If you could take it before you leave, that would be greatly appreciated. So I guess just closing remarks, any future research recommendations that we have, policy recommendations that we have, kind of closing remarks. We went from, you know, where we were, how far we've come, and just kind of wrapping it up. I'll toss it over to Florence first.
I think one area of, if we're talking about research on women and women's health, one area that has been that is important to spend more time looking at is reproductive health and women's health, in particular around pregnancy and shortly after children are born. And that is both from a physical health as well as a psychological health perspective. One big concern in our rural areas, we're looking at where we've lost, I think, across the country, so much capacity as well around obstetrics units. And women having to drive much further to get their appointments for, you know, when they're pregnant, and women's health. And so I think too is those concerns around, we haven't talked about it a whole lot, but what are those unique issues related to women that we need to be paying more attention to? Because, I mean, in some instances, I was recently at a conference, and someone who is in the space of rural health said, we're lucky that no women has died yet, but they're drive across 2 or 3 counties to give birth. And there are concerns around not having enough support for that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Marylynn?
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off that last comment from Florence, I think moving forward, I think it will be critically important to allow attention to and focus on women's self-care and how we prioritize that in our daily lives, whether that's mental, physical, self-care. I think that will be critically important to practice our skills on that for ourselves. And also, how do we address our farming interests with an aging body? And how do we protect ourselves? How do we keep ourselves going?
Yeah, that dynamic of aging and injury on the farm, and
yep. How do we continue to pursue what we enjoy with an aging body? So that's
without diminishing autonomy and capacity to Yeah, that's a great point.
So,
Christina, do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, I think for me, I always love like women communities, and so I'm really, you know, proud of the program that Marylynn is has developed there, because I love supporting like women groups where people can share, lift each other up, help one another, you know, find resources for one another, give advice. And so that sort of thing always makes me leave empowered. I know there's some other programs I've been to over the years. And I think women are great at building community. And I think having spaces where we can connect is really important. So I'm happy to see that work and the work of some other organizations across the state as well that are doing that.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm seeing right now that Julie's just popped a question in the chat. So she said the speakers have talked about physical hazards of farming, but there are significant psychological hazards relating to economic volatility and access to labor. How do farm women help their families navigate these challenges successfully? Seems like these might be a considerable burden of the many challenges farm women face.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that comes back to the piece of like that triple burden, but also the women being the caretakers of others. And we recently did a survey for another study on what type of strategies farmers use when they face financial and mental health challenges. And we had on the back of a survey, I opened, we received about 1,700 surveys back in the mail, and I opened a lot of those as I was sitting on calls or doing things. And this woman wrote around how, first of all, a friend of hers has recently passed away from cancer. And then she reflected on the fact that women are expected to take care of the animals, of the farmers, of the children, but who is there to care for them? And we do know that a lot of time too, Marylynn, you were talking about mental health in agriculture. We know that a lot of time it is women who encourages their partners, their spouses to go seek help. And so that caregiving, and even when you look at programs like Agribility, which help farmers with a disability, oftentimes it is the wife, it is the daughter-in-law who makes the call to get those services. And so I think there is like the weight on women's shoulder that we're seen as the caregivers of our families and of society. But at some point, who is there to help the helpers? I think that's the important question. And so I think the importance of those spaces, I could talk about Christina and Marylynn that you have, but also the importance of resources, right? Because moral support is important. But what we find in the research is when you don't have the resources that you need to be successful, we can tell each other and be supportive all day long. But if you don't have access to the childcare that you need, for example, another thing too is if you have children with special needs and you don't have access to the care that your children need, at the end of the day, it wears down on people. And what we found recently, my master's student Sharon is defending her thesis in a couple of weeks. So the thesis is almost ready. I'm so excited. But one of the findings that where Sharon worked on was that intersection between safety and childcare. And what she found in the data was that families who had access, who had access to some kind of childcare support were less likely to have the children spend more time on the farm. And that speaks to that importance of having the social and physical infrastructures in place to help people.
Absolutely. They're all great
When
points.
when they want it, right? It's not to force it on everyone.
Right.
But the thing too is like we've talked a lot about farmers today, which, you know, that's what we think about all day long. But a lot of the challenges that were discussed are faced by women of any in any kind of occupation, like that social societal pressure to do more with less. The childcare crisis doesn't impact just farmers; it impacts just about every working families in the US, where people are making decisions between do we have that second job or does one of us stay home because the cost of childcare is such that, and there are of course people who choose, right? People who say, I want to be home with my children. That's what I want to do. And that's wonderful to have that option too. So I think it's kind of bringing it back to like the bigger picture. And when we have conversations about the future of agriculture and rural areas, if we don't have that social and physical infrastructure in our rural communities, it makes it hard to attract and retain people. And to have families who want to move there and stay there or were able to stay where they grew up.
Marylynn or
Yep.
Christina, do either of you have anything to add to that? That's okay.
I
Just
don't
wanna
at this
make
time.
sure.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure you guys are able to speak when you want to. Yeah, those are all fantastic points and very important things to discuss. And farm women and women in general juggle a lot in their lives. So it is 2:51. We typically try to keep these around 45 minutes. So I want to thank our panelists so much for joining us today, and thank you to the attendees for joining. I'm going to remind you that there is a survey in the chat. If you could fill it out, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much to the Fields of Knowledge team and everybody that has helped with this production, and have a wonderful day. We will see you again. We're going to break for the summer, so probably in September. That is the plan. So we'll be back with Fields of Knowledge in September. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.